Ecotec motors are trash, or at least that's what the internet tells me. But today we're going to tear down this blown motor to see if these are junk or actually a junkyard gem. I'm Jerry, welcome to the Mostly Useless Garage. A quick recap, I installed this $300 2.4 liter LE5 GM Ecotec motor into my 1990 Mazda Miata back in the summer of 2023. Check out a bunch of videos about that up here. And everything was great. Until it wasn't, because last fall, this motor blew up a few laps into a track day, which was a huge bummer. But I got another one and re-Ecotec swapped my Miata and got it back on the road before winter. So awesome. But now it's spring and it's time to figure out what happened inside there. So let's deep dive into this thing and see if Ecotecs are as shit as they say. As mentioned, this is a GM Ecotec engine, which is a specific family of inline four-cylinder engines produced from the late 90s to today. Not to be confused with Buick's V6 Ecotec, GM's Family 2 Ecotec, or Ecotec, all caps trademark, which is a bunch of GM emissions technologies. Yeah, but this is an LE5 unit, which is a Generation 2 Ecotec, not a Family 2, found in mid to late 2000s Buick, Chevrolet, Pontiac, and Saturn models, with this particular one coming out of a 2008 Chevy Malibu. It's got 2,384 cubic centimeters of displacement, 88mm bore, 98mm stroke, and a 10.4:1 compression ratio, rated for a whopping 169 horsepower and 160 foot-pounds of torque. Starting from the top, we have this aluminum valve cover, not plastic, that hides the double overhead camshafts with the intake cam on this side and the exhaust cam on this side. Here's the ignition coils, an oil fill port, and the VVT solenoids that control the variable valve timing on both intake and exhaust cams. On the intake side of the motor is the fuel rail and injectors, and underneath we have a plastic intake manifold with an electronically controlled throttle body that would sit here. Over here is the oil filter housing, and underneath we have the oil pressure sensor and NOx sensor. And in this area is where the alternator and power steering pump are directly mounted. On the exhaust side, this is where the headers would be, and here's where the water pump and coolant tubes sit and connect with the coolant housing, thermostat housing, and heater core ports over here. On the front of the motor is our crank pulley, the idler, and the timing cover, with the timing set living behind it. This motor is made of 4 separate aluminum pieces bolted together. Here's the cylinder head, block, upper oil pan, and the lower oil pan. And notice its interesting styrofoam-like texture that's a result of its lost foam cast manufacturing. That's where they create a polystyrene pattern embedded in some special sand and pour in molten aluminum to vaporize the foam, fill the cavity, and precisely replicate the part. And if you haven't noticed already, a bunch of external parts are missing from this motor because I swapped them over to my new one. Let's start the teardown on the intake side and pretend remove the water pump and coolant tube and unbolt the coolant housing. On the exhaust side, let's pull the fuel rail with its 4 injectors and the plastic intake manifold. Now, using a 32mm socket, we remove the oil filler cap and inspect the filter cartridge, which shows signs of metal debris. Up top, let's remove the coil-on plug ignition coils and the 2 VVT solenoids. Now, we whip off the 10mm bolts holding on the valve cover. Flipping it over, we notice some dark staining, which indicates the original owner likely neglected oil changes and used poor quality oil. Looking at the valve train, we can now see the double overhead camshafts for both intake and exhaust, and there's quite a lot of residual carbon buildup and stains, especially towards the back of the motor. But at least the cam lobes seem decent with minimal wear. Overall though, everything has this darkened and charred appearance, which doesn't look great. And this is after I took several cleaning steps to try to revitalize the health of this poor neglected motor, but we'll talk about that a little later. Now we remove the cam phasers and unbolt the intake cam caps. The surfaces look good except for the front one, which seems kinda tarnished, and that releases the intake camshaft. Unbolting the exhaust cam caps, we see they look similar to the intake caps. With the cams out of the way, that reveals the roller rockers, lifters, and valves. On the front, we removed the crank pulley and timing cover. Now, this motor had nearly new timing components that I removed and reinstalled in my new motor. That's why this is empty. But here's what it looked like when I did a timing chain job in the video linked up here. We've got two chains, the timing chain in front and the balance shaft chain behind. The timing chain goes on the small outer crank gear and rides on plastic guides up to the camshafts. This chain is responsible for keeping the crank and cams timed in relation to each other, which is pretty important. The balance shaft chain goes on the larger inner crank gear and rides on a series of guides that drives the water pump and the two balance shafts that live inside the engine block itself, which is good because it offers a more compact package compared to, say, a Honda K-Series motor where the balance shafts are located in the oil pan. Notice that both the chain tensioners rely on oil pressure to maintain tension on their respective chains. Without proper tension, the chains can slacken, slip, and throw out the timing, causing fast-moving bits that should never touch to rapidly smash into each other. Now, a criticism of this motor is its seemingly complex timing setup and the use of many plastic guides. In particular, this black plastic left-hand timing chain guide often breaks off at the tip. But plastic timing components are rather common from this era of motor and are increasingly used in modern vehicles. Also, check out this small plastic oil squirter that's got a critical job to provide a steady flow of lubrication to the timing set. Yet another component of this motor that relies on good oil pressure. Before we leave here, it's worth mentioning that the water pump and oil pump are driven directly off the crank, which is a good thing as more modern vehicles have moved to potentially more failure-prone electric pumps like some BMW and Toyota models. We'll talk about it more later, but notice the position of these head bolts. There are 10 of them in total, 2 on either side, and then a couple of hidden bolts down here just to hold this together. Inspecting the top of the pistons, we see some dark caked-on carbon deposits, which might indicate oil intrusion into the combustion chamber from blow-by or through the PCV system. But we're not seeing anything out of place here, and there's no evidence of inappropriate touching between valve and piston. Flipping it over, we can now remove the lower oil pan. And notice the oil pickup tube here goes to this oil feed port on the upper oil pan. Speaking of the upper oil pan, check out this massive ladder frame structure held in by 16 15mm bolts that give the main bearing strength and reinforcement. And also, no surprise, there's a lot of carbon buildup here, but there are some clean areas. Interesting. In a way, we've come to the main event. Here's our crank. Not seeing any specific problems. Zipping off the 11mm connecting rod cap bolts, we can take a closer look at the lower bearings. And they're looking okay. Now we can lift out the forged crank and inspect the upper rod bearings. Now let's pop out the pistons. And remove the balance shaft gears and the two balance shafts themselves. Now that we've got this Ecotec motor completely disassembled and all its guts laid out on the bench here, let's take a closer look at this stuff. We've been talking a lot about the oiling system, so let's go through its journey, starting at the oil pan. Oil drains down by gravity from all the areas of the motor and collects in this area here. Now we see the oil pickup is placed in the lowest area of the sump, and as the oil is drawn into the pickup, the tube goes to the front right side of the upper oil pan here. And that leads to the oil pump inlet here, which feeds the oil pump that's integrated into the timing cover. Here's what that looks like. On the pump outlet side, the oil travels through this passage that's sandwiched between the upper oil pan and the block. This might seem like it could be prone to leaking, but it isn't really an issue. The oil then goes to the oil filter housing to be filtered by a cartridge filter. Obviously, the oil flows from the outside through the filter media, removing debris and contaminants, to the inside where it goes down through this passage at the bottom. About this cartridge filter itself, it's primarily made of recyclable paper and plastic, so it's considered greener than your typical spin-on canister oil filter. But under motorsport conditions, a poor quality cartridge can collapse and plug the oil system, so it's critically important to use a high quality filter like this one. And they're only about $5. The clean oil is then sent to the engine block's two main oil passages that run along either side of the cylinders, which provides lubrication to the main crankshaft bearings through these holes, as well as the balance shaft bearings in the body of the block. On the underside of the block, notice these beefy oil squirters, one for each cylinder, that provides a steady stream of oil onto the backside of the pistons. The oil splashes here and on the cylinder walls, and as the piston goes down, the oil control rings scrape oil off the walls and drain it into the sump, which highlights another criticism that this oil control ring package seems rather small. Up front in the timing area, the two main oil passages terminate here and are tapped to provide oil to the balance shaft chain tensioner that sits here and the oil squirter that sits here. Lubrication of the chains and guides in here is super important to keep things running cool and smooth. On the top of the block, we have an oil feed port at the back here that provides lubrication to the cylinder head valve train, and this oil feed at the front that goes to the timing chain tensioner. Looking at the underside of the head, here's the chain tensioner feed, and it provides oil into this little hole in the tensioner right here to maintain proper tension on the timing chain. In some motorsport applications like endurance racing, some builders opt for a mechanical timing chain tensioner to alleviate the reliance on oil pressure. On the top side of the head, there are two oil passages that run along here and provide oil to the camshafts through these holes, and to all the lifters. With the lifter sitting in the rocker like this, the oil provides pressure to it, eliminating any slack, and pushes the other side against the top of the valve spring. As the cam lobes push down on the roller, it opens the valves in time with the rotation of the crank. And that's pretty much how the oiling system provides lubrication through this engine. Taking a quick look at the block again, we notice that it's an open deck design, which means coolant can flow around each of the cylinders through this jacket to extract the heat from all those cycles of suck, squeeze, bang, blow. On the underside of the head, we see the coolant jacket also goes around each of the cylinders to provide cooling. Taking a look at the intake side of the head, notice that this is a port injection motor, where the fuel injectors sit in these ports. And the oval intake ports here show carbon stains on the outside, but as we look inside and on the back of the valve, it's very clean in there. This is a huge benefit of port injection, but modern motors have moved to direct injection, which puts the injector inside the combustion chamber for better efficiency and power, at the expense of carbon buildup in the intake ports and on the back of the valves. One more thing, notice this outer ring here is pretty much the size of the intake manifold port, but these intake ports are significantly smaller. A problem with these heads is their restrictive flow, which compared to the insanely high-flowing Honda K-Series heads, these are downright asthmatic. So Ecotecs respond really well to ported heads and high-flowing aftermarket intake manifolds. Also, over here on the exhaust ports, there are some gains to be had in port matching these to the headers. Coming back to the valve cover, let's talk about the PCV system. As you know, its job is to filter oil out of the crankcase gases and allow clean air to recirculate into the intake tract. So let's take a look at this surprisingly complex system. This cover plate is a simple design to allow oil to drain from these slots, but there are three sets of plastic baffle plates that cover these rectangular chambers, which go from dirty to clean. These plates are louvered and have some holes to presumably allow oil to drain. And while the rear two chambers have one plate, the front one, that's open to the PCV vent port, has two stacked on top of each other. I'm genuinely shocked at the sophistication and effectiveness of this baffle system because these motors are infamous for burning oil, allegedly due in no small part to a poorly designed and ineffective PCV system. But we haven't yet come to a definitive conclusion on why this motor failed. Or did we? Let's take a closer look at the connecting rod on cylinder 4, and notice that the lower rod bearing and the upper rod bearing are missing. And coming over to the crank, we've got not one, but two rod bearings fused to the crank. They're not coming off. So clearly, this failure is known as a spun bearing, which refers to when one of the connecting rod bearings dislodges, spins around, and joins its forbidden mate. This can happen for many reasons, but I'm pretty sure in my case this was a combination of high lateral Gs and sustained high RPM, which led to oil starvation and catastrophic failure, because a moron forgot to top up the oil. But it's not all bad news. Well, it's mostly bad news. But one thing I am quite pleased about is the results of some of my engine cleaning steps. When I first got this motor, I knew it was severely neglected with actual goopy carbon sludge everywhere. So I sprayed a generous amount of Clean Flow 822 combustion chamber cleaner into each cylinder and let it sit for a few days. Then, when I finally got it running, I dumped in a can of Motul engine flush into fresh oil, ran it for about 30 minutes, and then changed it out for brand new synthetic oil. Finally, on the last oil change, I filled it with Valvoline Restore and Protect, but only got to run it for maybe 1,000 kilometers before the engine failure. And of course, I had to pay for that oil myself. Valvoline, please sponsor me. So I can't be sure which of those 3 products did the most good, but we can see that the piston rings are 100% moving freely, and the oil control ring package, including that corrugated bit in the middle, are virtually sludge-free. And looking at the back of the piston again, it's in nearly new condition with just a slight golden hue about it. And in other parts of the engine, we're seeing the start of similar improvements. I can't be absolutely certain which of these 3 products made the most difference, but if I had to guess, it's gotta be that Valvoline Restore and Protect, even though I only ran it for less than 1,000 kilometers. Valvoline recommends 3 oil change intervals, about 14,000 kilometers, for optimal cleaning efficacy. There are a lot of videos about this, most notably a recent Gears and Gasoline episode with before and after teardowns of 500,000-mile engines. Link in the description. So, are Ecotec motors trash? Well, yes, they can be. Look, we know they got shortcomings. They're absolutely critical reliance on oil pressure, that small piston oil control ring package, and the suboptimally flowing heads. They've also got a lot going for it. It's lightweight aluminum construction, compact design, balance shafts integrated into the block, and strong bottom end. The most common criticisms leveled at this engine are that they burn oil, plug the PCV system, and throw timing chains at alarming rates. Some mechanics even credit these for putting their kids through college. Not regular college, I'm talking medical or law school. But if we're willing to exercise some objectivity, we might entertain the idea that maybe Ecotecs aren't trash, but they came in a lot of trash cars. Entry-level bargain models like Cobalts, HHRs, and Saturns, and cheap cars attract cheap buyers. Nothing's foolproof, and a wise man once said this:
a common mistake that people make when trying to design something completely foolproof is to underestimate the ingenuity of complete fools.
So a lot of the buyers of these bargain basement cars also tended to neglect basic maintenance, like oil changes, and when they did, they'd use the cheapest conventional oil possible and beat on the motor like it owed them money. But these engines don't need much. Good oil volume, good oil quality to make good oil pressure. If we're willing to challenge some of the stereotypes, compared to the famous Honda K motor, the Ecotec shares some of the same ethos. A durable aluminum double overhead can with variable valve timing, inline 4 with good power density, born out of the sport compact scene in the late 90s and early 2000s. The K is a great motor that makes excellent power and revs to the moon. While the Ecotec makes less peak horsepower, its party trick is its solid mid-range torque. They both have timing chains with some plastic components and run best with proper basic maintenance. And they both accept boost well in stock form. I love Ks, K-Cups, Special K. I'm all about the K. For engine swaps, Ecotecs tend to be quite smooth and quiet, and due to its compactness, they fit into many chassis, while K-swaps often need to eliminate their balance shafts and therefore can suffer from some vibrations. Also, they sit a little bit taller, so that needs to be considered when planning an engine swap. The internet loves a good argument, and the algorithm's always pushing us to choose sides and die defending them. But I think we should be open to all well-formed opinions, do our own research, research and not just accept what people think is right. So hopefully this video has questioned some of the common assumptions about GM's infamous Ecotec engine. But what do you think? Agree or disagree? Please leave a comment. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, you're awesome. I'm mostly useless. Thanks for watching.